Okay. I am still admitting people as we go, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass it over to Zoe and let her introduce herself and talk a little bit about how she got into the role she is at now. And then she'll give her presentation. It'll be about 20 minutes. If you have an urgent question during that time, feel free to put it in the chat, and she can address that just to help you like understand the presentation. But if you have a question you can hold on to, we will save that for the panel afterwards.
All right, so thank you everyone for coming to this webinar. Thank you, Claire, for inviting me. I'm going to talk today about self-advocacy and disclosure. There we go. My name is Zoe Gross. I work for the Autistic Self Advocacy Network. We're a nonprofit organization that's run by and for autistic people ourselves. We do a lot of policy work focusing on the needs of autistic adults. Our motto is nothing about us without us. Before I get into my stuff, a couple things. One, I have to have my phone here because my computer does weird things when I try and use it for audio on Zoom presentations, so apologies for that. Two, I tend to speak pretty fast. If I am speaking too fast and you can't understand me, feel free to message the chat asking me to slow down. I can't see it, but Claire can, and Claire can ask me to not talk so fast if need be. I've had people need help with that before because it can be not the most accessible. So let me know if you need more information about something or if I need to slow the heck down. All right, I'm going to jump right into it with self-advocacy. So self-advocacy is right in the name of the Autistic Self Advocacy Network. It's obviously something that's very important to us. Self-advocacy means speaking up for yourself, for your communities, and for the things that are important to you. And that includes a really wide range of things. So it doesn't just look like the work that ASAN does. It doesn't just look like the work that people do self-advocating for themselves in school or at work. It includes everything from saying no to asking for what you want and need, finding a way to make yourself heard, telling people about your thoughts and your feelings, what you want, making the choices in your life, being in control of your own life, and then advocating for or against policies that affect you and your communities. And that can happen in a bunch of ways. That can be organizing in a community, it can be political organizing, but self-advocacy is going to be a part of everyone's daily life, or that's the goal. Here's a big question that I often run into: who can be a self-advocate? So I often hear people say things like, if you can advocate for yourself, you must not really be disabled. Or, well, maybe you can be a self-advocate, but my child has a disability and will never be able to self-advocate. One of the first times I heard that was I was talking to a parent advocate. It was about 9 years ago. Since then, as I understand it, the kid that person was talking about has graduated high school, sued the company that makes their AAC device because the company was going to take the software off the market and the person needed it to communicate. They now give presentations on self-advocacy and on their experiences at conferences. They've got a job. So obviously this person is a self-advocate by any measure, because it turns out that kids grow up and that all of us, no matter how old we are learning and growing and learn new skills. And that includes the skills we need for self-advocacy. But don't worry, because even if you never sue anyone, even if you never graduate high school, even if you never get a job, you can be a self-advocate. There are not a lot of requirements to be a self-advocate. I will tell you them now. You need two things. One, you need preferences. So you need to prefer some things to other things. Two, you need a way to let people know about your preferences. Currently, that means you need to be able to move at least one muscle in your body. With technology and time, that will change. But for now, if you can move your eyelid, if you can move one finger, if you can move a toe, if you can move any muscle in your cheek, we can rig up a yes-no system for you where you can share with us your preferences and build from there to develop a communication system. We don't currently have communication solutions for everyone. Not everyone can access the currently available alternatives and augmentative communication, AAC, tech that we have now. But we are working towards a world where everyone can communicate their needs and can self-advocate. And that doesn't mean curing people's disabilities so that they become people with the abilities of what's considered typical. It means developing new technology so that no matter what people's abilities or disabilities, they can share what they need and want with everyone. But self-advocacy is much broader than people think. And the non-speaking kid who's hiding under a table and refuses to come out when guests come over is self-advocating just as much as the disabled adult who testifies at a congressional hearing. All of this self-advocacy is critically important and really meaningful. And helping someone self-advocate and honoring their self-advocacy, however it's expressed, is how to help a person with a disability control their own life. I'm going to talk a little bit now about the self-advocacy movement. The self-advocacy movement was started in the 1970s. It started with a group of people called People First. Basically, at that time, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities weren't getting to speak for ourselves as much. We were often stuck in sheltered workshops or in institutions. Parents or doctors were considered the people that should speak for us. But then in the 70s and 80s, self-advocates, so people with intellectual disabilities, often people that had been put away in institutions or in sheltered workshops who hadn't been able to go to school in their communities, decided enough of this. They wanted to get out of the institutions. They wanted to work with everyone else. They wanted to be part of their communities and not shut away. They started making leadership programs. They started forming conventions and establishing groups, going into segregated spaces where people with intellectual disabilities were shut away and saying, hey, come out and join us in the community and become a self-advocate. That became a national group, Self-Advocates Becoming Empowered, or SABE, which is a fantastic organization you should all check out. And today in the United States, there are more than 800 self-advocacy groups. I'm going to keep coming back to this, but basically when you hear someone say self-advocacy is for people who don't need a lot of help or who don't need support, or this person has an intellectual disability and they can't be a self-advocate, we know that's wrong, because without people with intellectual disabilities, we would not have the self-advocacy movement. ASAN would not exist. The self-advocacy movement would not exist. We owe all of this to people with intellectual disabilities who were considered so severe that they were put away in institutions, that they weren't considered worthy of being in the community with everyone else. They're the ones that organized to develop the self-advocacy movement. I'm going to read you a few quotes from early organizers of People First in the self-advocacy movement. This is Nancy Ward. There's a picture of her on the screen and a quote that says, "I didn't see myself as a person because of the labels that were placed on me. Now I see myself as a person. People First taught me how to say, yes, I have a disability and that's okay." This is Gloria Steinbring. There's also a picture of her on the screen and a quote from her, which is, "In 1975, some people from the local ARC came to our sheltered workshop to talk about voter registration. We learned about self-advocacy and met other people who were speaking up for themselves. People at the workshop kept telling us, you'll be here the rest of your lives. They kept pounding this into us. But when I started going to self-advocacy meetings, I learned that I had rights and that I could stand up for myself. I was tired of being treated like a kid by the workshop." So again, these were people who, the other people in their lives, the people who were running their lives, often their parents, maybe their doctors, maybe their teachers, maybe the people who ran their sheltered workshops or their institutions, looked at them and said, these people can't self-advocate. That's what the authorities said. These people don't deserve to run their own lives. And they said, no, we do. And they learned that from each other. They learned that from other people with intellectual disabilities. I'm going to talk now about some ways to self-advocate. And for each one, I'll just give a couple examples. So for example, self-advocating in school. If you're in the US and you're a high school student in a public high school and you get special education services, then you have an IEP meeting. That's an individualized education meeting. Being part of that meeting, and eventually as your self-advocacy skills grow in your school career, leading that meeting is a great way to build self-advocacy skills. Advocating for accommodations in classes or on campus. Say, for example, you need a note taker in class. For some people, this is a big difference when they go to college, because if you went to a public school, the school had a responsibility under the law to identify your disability and what you need for your disability and what accommodations you need and give those to you. Now, schools are not always good at that, and sometimes they just don't want to do their job. But when you go to college, it really changes, and it's not the college's responsibility to identify what accommodations you need. It's on you to go and tell them, and sometimes to fight them until they give them to you. And that can be a whole thing. But that is a really important part of self-advocacy. And the fact that some people will eventually have to do that is a reason to teach self-advocacy skills before someone leaves high school. If you see bullying or harassment, intervening to stop that, that is self-advocacy. Because remember, even if it isn't you that's being bullied, self-advocacy also includes standing up for your community and people in your community and generally making your community a better place. Advocating for better school policies or more accessibility on campus. Let's say you go to a school that doesn't have wheelchair ramps. That school is basically turning wheelchair users away. Advocating for your community could include making sure that wheelchair users can access your school, making sure that your school is putting money aside to make those changes, that kind of thing. Here's an example of someone who self-advocated at school. This is a picture on the left of Micah Fialka-Feldman, and a quote saying, "After Micah Fialka-Feldman helped move his sister into her dorm room, he decided he wanted the experience of dorm living too. At the time, he was taking a 2-hour bus ride to get to his non-degree program at a college outside Detroit for students with intellectual disabilities and Down syndrome. When the university said he couldn't live on campus, he used the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, to sue, and won in 2009. So because this is a little unclear in the quote, Micah went to a program where non-disabled students who weren't in the specialized program, were allowed to live on campus. But Micah, because he was in this program to get extra support that was for students with disabilities, wasn't allowed to. So he had to sue them to get that right, to say, if you're trying to, like, if I'm a student at this college and what you're trying to do is have me as a student and give me the college experience, part of that is living on campus and being in the dorms. And the courts agreed with him. He won that lawsuit. Getting medical care is a big place where people end up self-advocating a lot in their own lives. And that can include advocating for yourself with doctors. So if you have concerns that you feel aren't getting listened to, making sure to bring them up, telling people what you're experiencing. If a doctor recommends treatment options and you have questions, asking those questions, making sure that you're being given all the options, deciding what doctors you see, generally making sure that the process is accessible to you and is going in a way that works for you. So some doctors can be really kind of breeze through the appointment, and they'll just sort of run around and say, just like, put this thing on your chest, or like, breathe out now, I'm listening to your lungs, or now you're going to take this medicine, or why aren't you exercising more, stand on the scale, and just like rush you through the thing. And a way to self-advocate for yourself can be like, wait, I don't understand, or I don't want you to touch me right now, or whatever else you need to make sure that you're getting what you need out of the doctor's appointment. And this is something that a lot of people with disabilities aren't taught to do. We're taught to really trust doctors and sort of do what they say. And that can mean that we are disempowered when it comes to getting medical care. And that can lead to worse health outcomes for us. It can mean the doctors aren't giving us routine screenings that we should get. It can mean that doctors don't take us seriously when we bring up concerns, and that's not our fault. It's the fault of ableism, discrimination against people with disabilities in the healthcare system. But there is something that we can do about it, and that includes deciding what doctors we see. So if a doctor isn't treating us right and isn't giving us the help we need, we can say, no, I'm going to see another doctor. Making our own medical decisions and making our decisions in general is also a huge part of self-advocacy, which brings us to big life decisions. So being the person to decide things like where you live, who you live with, what you're going to do after high school, whether you want to start a family, all that kind of stuff. Part of self-advocacy is making those decisions for ourselves. And it's okay if you need support to make those decisions. If you think about it, no one really makes these decisions. I can say words. No one makes these decisions by themselves. Just any random non-disabled person, if you ask them, did you talk to anyone about whether to buy a house? That won't say, no, it was a secret. I didn't tell anyone I was thinking about buying a house. They'll say, yeah, I brought my sister to look at different houses with me. Or like, my husband and I decided together what to do. Or I asked my friend who knows more about this what I should pay attention to when I'm looking for houses. Like, everyone gets support making these decisions. And it's okay if people with disabilities need more help or different help, or if it looks different for us. If we need more structured support, if we need more intense support, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be the ones making these decisions for ourselves. This is a picture of Lois Curtis. Lois Curtis is a really important figure in the history of self-advocacy. She was the plaintiff in the Olmstead decision. So this was in the 80s, Lois was stuck in an institution and she wanted to get out. But the state Medicaid would not give her services in the community, and she needed services to live like by herself. She needed personal assistance and support, and they said you can only have that in the institution. But the institution wasn't the right place for her to be. She wanted to be in her community and not segregated. So she sued her state to get the right to have services in the community, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled that Lois and her co-plaintiff, Elaine Wilson, did have the right to get services in their community. And part of how Lois now does that, Elaine Wilson unfortunately passed away. Lois Curtis is still alive and thriving. She's an artist. She's fantastic. And she is not under guardianship. She makes her own decisions. And part of how she does that is she has what's called a micro board, which is a group of people that meet to support her in making decisions and like talk about her goals. She wants to buy a house one day. They talk about like how are they going to work towards that. They help her set up shows in galleries to show her artwork. And she runs this whole thing. She runs the meetings of her micro board. It's sort of like running your own IEP meetings, but instead of being about your education, it's just about like all of the adult things going on in your life. And it's a formalized way for people to get support for those decisions from people they trust without having someone else run their life. And then, of course, there is political advocacy. Because the election is coming up, I'm going to make a big old nonpartisan plug for voting. Voting is really important. It's a way that everyone gets to have our say in the political process. And if you are in the U.S. right now, you should plan to vote in the upcoming U.S. election. So you can check out autisticadvocacy.org/vote for all kinds of resources on that. You can learn where your polling place is. If you can check if you're registered, whether there's still time to register. We've got information on voting by mail, on what your state's voter ID requirements might be, on, your rights as a voter with a disability, all that kind of stuff. So you should definitely check that out. But there's other ways that self-advocacy can be political. So talking to your elected officials about the political issues that affect your life. Going to town halls, commenting on regulations, things like that. These are all ways that you can have input into the political process. And then sharing your story to help people understand why a policy matters. And this isn't sharing your story like, as people with disabilities, we're often told to share our personal life stories as a way to inspire people or to make people feel good about themselves. But this isn't that. This is about sharing our stories for a purpose because it is an effective political tool and only in the ways that will help us achieve our goal. So for example, if your state is considering expanding Medicaid, you could share your story of how that would help you, or if you have been on Medicaid, how that has helped you and how it would help other people. And that's personal to you. It's something that affects your life, and you're only sharing the parts that will help you achieve your goal of getting the state to do the thing. But sharing your story is powerful because it puts a face to an issue in the minds of people who are making policy. And I just want to emphasize again that whether we like it or not, all of us do have an interest in politics. All of us are affected by politics in very real ways that make our lives better or make our lives worse. So politics, like who is elected, how the people who have been elected vote, what kind of laws they write, what the court says, that all affects our lives in very real ways. So like, are there good schools in your area for you to send your children to? Do you have the right to marry? What rights do you have at work? If a police officer hurts you, will someone hold them accountable? Can you get health insurance? Like all of these things are affected by politics. Political advocacy is self-advocacy. And here's a great example of that. This is Liz Weintraub. Liz is another founding member of the Self-Advocacy Movement. And this is her testifying at the hearing for when Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed to the Supreme Court. And she was talking about a ruling he had made as a judge where he said that women with disabilities who were under guardianship didn't have the right to decide whether or not to get an abortion. And Liz says, as a woman with an intellectual disability, I know what it's like for other people to try to make decisions about my life, my relationships, and my body. Judge Kavanaugh seems to think that people like me don't deserve a say in our health care, and to me that is dangerous, discriminatory, and shows he doesn't really understand the idea of nothing about us without us. I really hope that in the course of this quick presentation, I've hit home that people with intellectual disabilities are the leaders and the founders of the self-advocacy movement, because I often hear someone say that if someone has an intellectual disability, they cannot be a self-advocate, and that is just not true. It's absurd. People with all kinds of disabilities, people who speak, people who don't, people who live independently, or people who need support every hour, every day, people with intellectual disabilities, people without, all of us can be self-advocates, and all of our self-advocacy is important. I am running towards the end of my time. I was asked to talk a little bit about disclosure. I know we're going to talk about this more in the panel too, so I'm just going to give some quick thoughts. Being out as having a disability can be an important part of self-advocacy. It's your choice who you tell, how and when you tell. There are some times when people are advised not to share. For example, the traditional wisdom is when you're applying to jobs, don't say that you have disability until they hire you, unless you need accommodations before then, like while they're interviewing you. Being out in your life can be really powerful, and it's something that a lot of people whose disabilities are visible sort of have no choice but to do. But I do need to let people know when I talk about this that it can lead to discrimination. So for example, discrimination in housing, in child custody, in hiring, things like that. So it is personal. But one reason you might consider disclosing is that your disability identity is powerful and you have legal rights as a person with a disability that you don't have without disclosing. So for example, if you don't speak and someone is like, oh, that person is shy, there's no Shy Americans Act to guarantee that you have rights as a shy person. So the assumption they've made about you, that doesn't give you rights. But if you say, I'm a person with a disability, that's why I don't speak, I need these accommodations, and I have the right to those, like that's a different matter. Your disability is powerful. I'm gonna end my slide. This is a poem by Laura Hershey that I encourage all of you to look up, but I am out of time. Want to turn it back over to the panel, but I'm happy to take questions if anyone has those.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zoe. I knew when we invited you to speak that we were going to get a great presentation, but I didn't know we were going to get so much history there. And that's a valuable part of understanding where self-advocacy started and where it is now. So I would like to ask now that all of our panelists turn on your video, and I will kind of point to you one by one to introduce yourself. So obviously we've heard a little bit from Zoe. We have also got Eric, Preston, and Amaya on our panel today. So some great representation from people at different stages in life doing very different things. Let's see, Preston, would you like to begin by introducing yourself and just telling us what you do?
Yeah, hi, my name is Preston. I'm an artist, and I'm currently not working right now, just going back to school, and yeah.
All right, great. Thank you, Preston. And let's see,
Welcome.
Maya, would you like to go next?
I can go next. My
Oh,
Amaya, you're on. Oh.
My name's Amaya. I am a freshman at Austin Peay State University. I'm only 17. I graduated high school a year early because I hated it so much that I wanted out. And now I am a math major for now until I find something that's better than math, but I doubt it.
awesome. Thank you, Amaya. I think a lot of us can probably relate to the idea that getting out of high school is a big life goal and just moving on to something that is your unique interest. So thank you. And then finally, we have Eric, if you want to tell us about you and what you're doing.
Hi, my name is Eric Garcia. I actually just left the Washington Post 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
It's okay. I am to spend more time, finish working on my book, and to do more freelance journalism. So that's what I'm doing these days. I am 29 years old, but yeah, I'm basically working on a book about autism. And I've interviewed Dave and Claire and talked with Claire a few times. I met Claire when she was in Washington, D.C. So.
Yes, we had the common experience of both having been White House interns. So we're able to bond a little bit over that as well. And I think all of you should seek out Eric's book when it's available. We'll have to send you that information when it gets published, because that's going to be exciting too.
Yeah, everybody at Vanderbilt is also incredible and doing a lot of great work.
Yes, this is a fantastic partnership. So we're excited to have this team. You know, we've got a student, we've got an artist, we've got a journalist, an author, and we've got somebody who's doing professional advocacy. I haven't mentioned this, but I am on the autism spectrum. A lot of you already know that, but I'm the communications coordinator at the Frist Center. And so both myself and a lot of the people working at the Frist Center are self-advocates. And that's why we thought we needed a webinar that featured autistic voices and actually got their perspective on issues relating to us. So again, nothing about us without us. It's a great quote from Zoe's presentation. Let's begin with a question that seems simple, but can end up being a little bit more complex. And that is, to any and all of our panelists, you can choose to just kind of wave your hand and jump in. Who do you disclose your disability to, and how do you decide when or if you're going to disclose to them? Would anybody like to start? Amaya?
I can.
Great.
So I'm not the type of person who, like, when I meet someone, I introduce myself by, hi, I'm autistic, although I would like to be, but that's kind of awkward. And I don't want them to think that autism is my only personality trait. But I try to make it a rule where, like, all of my friends or anyone that I'm regularly interacting with knows, just because I feel like it explains a lot of things that if they didn't know, they can make a lot of assumptions. And I don't want to give them that much wiggle room because they could wiggle in the wrong direction. So I generally, like, all of my friends or most of my coworkers, at least the ones I talk to regularly, and the teachers that I have issues with, I'll bring it up anytime I have an issue.
Great. I think that's a good rule that a lot of people on the spectrum choose to live by, which is like, if I interact with you regularly, I'm going to let you know. Any other perspectives on that from our panelists? Okay, Eric.
Yeah, I can take liberty with this because of the fact that I, in the beginning of my career, I didn't disclose, but then when I wrote a whole damn, pardon me, I don't know if I can curse, but before I wrote a whole damn piece on being autistic for The Atlantic, which is how Claire and I got to know each other, is we were taught is that I didn't disclose. I didn't think it was a big deal. Nowadays, when you Google me, that's like the first thing that comes up. And it's definitely going to come up more when this book comes out. I mean, but then also I've written about being in recovery because I'm a recovering addict as well. So I think the thing that I've learned is that, I mean, if you Google me, you know, that's going to come out inevitably. But my other feeling is, I don't really feel a need to tell people unless it's really absolutely necessary. So like Zoe said, if I feel like it's needed for a job interview nowadays, of course, because I work in media, most people are likely to read that piece, but I don't really need to tell people when I first meet them. I don't need to tell coworkers largely. Only if I only disclose to the extent that I feel that in a scenario, it can, to Maya's part, to the extent that I feel that it would be necessary to help people understand how I'm operating. Other than that, I don't really feel a need. I don't really feel that there's a need to do it. It's my business and it's nobody else's business. You know, so for example, I'm Mexican American. You could probably tell that by my skin. I'm Latino, but you don't know I'm Mexican American off the bat. I am Protestant, but that doesn't have any bearing on me. That you know, everybody has different things. So it's really your business and your business alone.
Yeah. I think you might have frozen, Eric. I don't know if that's only for me or not. Oh, there you are. Moving again. Great. I think there's something relatable about the idea that, you know, in a sense, while disability is a part of identity, it's also medical information, and you have a right to decide who you share that with. I know I was in an airport a couple of weeks ago with my service dog, and had somebody ask me, just another person about to get on a plane, oh, what kind of service dog is she? And that's a question that by law I'm required to answer. She does medical, like medicine reminders at different points in the day. And then he says, what medicine do you take? And I was like, whoa, there's a line there. And so it's that kind of thing where you can sense it when somebody is prying a little bit. And it's definitely healthy and certainly a part of self-advocacy to know when to draw a line and say, I don't think that's something I'd like to share with you. Anyway, a bit of a tangent there, but Zoe or Preston, if either of you would like to address this question.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I mean, I only share or talk about my disability with people within my circle of trust, and that includes friends, some family, and co-workers, bosses, whom I was working with at the time, and yeah. So,
Yeah. So I'm hearing a lot of people say that it's like not something they tell their barista at Starbucks, but if they're getting to know somebody or working closely with somebody, they'll share that. Zoe, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, so working for the Autistic Self Advocacy Network, if you Google me, like the first thing you find out is that I'm autistic. So that's kind of a decision I made when I got into disability advocacy, that like, I'm just going to be out about this forever to whoever wants to know. It's just kind of as a requirement of doing the work that I do. But there are times when I don't tell people, like if I'm trying to think of an example. I think the most common one actually is when I'm acting as a support person to another disabled person. Then I will try to act like I'm not disabled, because I kind of need to be viewed as like the non-disabled person in the room, in case there are times, and like this is messed up, but when someone comes in with a support person, like the doctor or the official or whoever they're interacting with may like view the support person as like vouching for them with an official non-disabled stamp of approval. And so in that case, I kind of don't want it to be like shocking them by being like, oh, there are two disabled people here. It's the autistic leading the autistic into this doctor's appointment, and who do I trust? So, you know, like, and that can be really annoying. Like, I might, like, if it's loud in a doctor's office, I might still not put on my headphones, and then I have to like go and hide under the table for the rest of the day. That's like a tough situation, but that's a pretty rare situation where like I might help someone better because of how society is discriminatory, but I might help someone better if someone doesn't know that I have a disability.
Absolutely. I hate that I can relate to that, Zoe. I hate that I know what you're saying there and that I've seen it take place, because a lot of times, as someone who works with a lot of autistic adults, when I help them like make contact with someone or help them advocate, I'm likely to be taken more seriously. If they have no clue I'm on the spectrum too. And I also relate to the idea of being a very public self-advocate, because I know when I did a TEDx talk, like if someone Googles me now, they find that. And one of the first things I say in it is that I have authority to talk about this because I'm on the spectrum. So that's definitely one path you can take. And a path that, you know, like Eric mentioned, he's also sort of taken, because when you Google his name, you're seeing that article. Okay, my last question, so there were only two, for the whole panel that everybody's gonna get a chance to answer here, is specifically about situations you've encountered advocating for yourself. And I want to know if there's ever a time when you have faced a challenge in self-advocacy. And so we can interpret that broadly. It may be that somebody doubted your diagnosis and thus they didn't want to provide an accommodation, or it may be that they didn't take what you said you needed seriously. Or you yourself were like kind of having trouble building the confidence to advocate. I just want to hear about some of the challenges that people on the spectrum are facing as we enter the self-advocacy space and put it into practice. And then after we hear from everyone who would like to answer on that question, I want to take any inquiries we have from the audience, and no question is insignificant or wrong, and those you can put in the chat. But on this topic of difficulties, or even just barriers, challenges y'all have faced in self-advocacy, does anyone have something come to mind for them? Amaya, if you want to start us again.
So for like a year and a half while I was in high school, I had a job at a restaurant, Panera Bread, and all the managers are like their own different breed of ableism, where some of them are terrible people and some of them are just ignorant. So I had to win a lot of them over, and some of them really never, well, the two that really hated me got to a point where they would admit that I was a good worker behind my back, but they would still treat me poorly to my face. But the few that I had issues with at the beginning, I ended up becoming good friends with. Like, for example, one of them, her name was Yuki. She's kind of rude, which I guess is just her own personality, but I took it to heart because I thought she was specifically treating me bad because I was autistic. It turns out she treats everyone bad because she takes her stress over her job out on everyone else. But once I kind of understood that, I realized we had a lot in common. because we're both nitpicky about the way food is prepared. So we would bond over being like, why did they prep this that way? That's wrong. And we would like have that with each other. And now it's not now anymore. I am not at that job anymore. But it got to a point where if I had a problem with a different manager, she would actually advocate for me to them. And she would like speak on my behalf if they were talking bad about me around her. So that's cool.
Yeah, I'm hearing that you kind of found an ally because you persisted in that self-advocacy even when it seemed like you weren't getting any good responses at first. I like that. And I think self-advocacy doesn't always have to be just you standing on your own. Sometimes it does mean bringing allies around you who are able to help you execute the decisions that you've made for yourself. So anyway, all right, anybody else on difficulties they have faced as they have been self-advocates?
I think that you mentioned this the last of them, is that a lot of times you said working up the kind of overcoming kind of the fear of advocating for it. I think one of the things that's happened, to Zoe's point, disability is inherently political. This is the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the 30th anniversary of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And by virtue of that, one of the things that we know as disabled people is that, first, the thing that you need to understand about any kind of accommodations or politics and policy is it's about allocating scarce resources. And we know that disabled people get the scarcest of the scarcest resources. So a lot of times what happens, I think, if we aren't severely autistic, and that word is very loaded, but there's this feeling almost, I think, when you do need accommodations and you do need supports. If you can speak, or if you are even at a university, or if you have a job, or if you have any of these things, there's this almost kind of shame around asking for these things, because as soon as, well, you're reallocating services that would otherwise go to people who really need it, and using it on other people. So there's almost this kind of guilt and shame if you, but the fact of the matter is that just because you could speak or hold a job, things like that, just because you're on campus doesn't make you any less autistic. Just because you hold employment doesn't make you any less autistic. I think that's an example of, I think, what we call internalized ableism, but also internalized unwillingness to talk about self-advocacy is just kind of
Wow, that's so incredibly relatable. And I love hearing you guys voice experiences I've had, because that helps me understand what's common to the autistic experience. We've also got a great conversation going in the chat. So if anybody hasn't checked that out yet and wants to, Nina and Samantha and Laura and a couple of folks are just talking about their experiences too. So that's awesome. I love that we are facilitating a conversation. Preston, did you want to answer the question about experiences you've had self-advocating?
Yeah, no comment.
No comment. All right. We can skip you for this one. Zoe, what about you?
I definitely think one of the biggest challenges for me and for a lot of the people who work with me at ASAN is getting put in boxes. So we've noticed over the years that if we share our personal experiences and details about our own disabilities and what we experience and how autism affects us day to day, people sort of put us in a box and they say oh, you're a self-advocate. And that means that you only talk about your personal experience and you're not an expert. So we're going to invite you to conferences to talk about your personal experience, and we might ask you really intrusive questions like, how do you go to the bathroom, or what age were you when you were toilet trained, or would you consider dating a non-disabled person? But we won't ask you what law should we make, because self-advocates don't know about that stuff and they're not the experts. We don't ask them about those things. We only ask non-disabled people. But then if you don't talk about your personal experience and your disability and how that affects you, people sort of put you in a different box and they say, oh, you're not a self-advocate, you're a policy expert. And I will ask you what laws I should make, and I will ask you, policy questions, and I'll take your expertise seriously, and I'll trust you when you talk about disability that is beyond your personal experience. But at the same time, I'm kind of going to discredit you when you say that you're speaking from authority as a disabled person, because real disabled people aren't experts. Real disabled people are only here to tell us about their personal experience. And it's really a catch-22, because you can feel oh, there's no way to get non-disabled people to take me seriously. And why don't they have to go through this? They're just kind of presumed to be experts and to have the relevant experience without kind of having to thread that needle. It can be frustrating. And like, I've kind of had people view me both ways at once. Like, I've been in a conversation with another advocate where they're saying, oh, you're not really a self-advocate, you're just a policy person, and if you don't understand this because your disability is mild, and make no kinds of assumptions about me. And then at the same time, they like reach over and adjust my clothes, saying like, oh, look, you don't even know how to dress yourself, you shouldn't be here. Like you're actually too disabled to have a political opinion. Like, people will do both to you at once. And it's upsetting and it's frustrating, because you feel like if they were going to approach this logically, even if they want to discriminate against you, could they discriminate against you in a way that is like internally consistent? But they won't. And it's not because of what you're doing. It's not because of how you are. It's because of their biases and prejudices and beliefs that they had before they met you, and that they like are invested in and need to maintain. And they will believe about you what they need to in order to keep those views until something eventually changes their mind or doesn't. So that's like an ongoing frustration. And how everyone like navigates that, threads that needle, what balance they pick, it's up to every individual person. But it's, if that's happening to you, just know, like, it's not because of something that you did. It's just a very common thing that unfortunately self-advocates are kind of up against all the time.
Wow. Okay. Zoe, speaking to cognitive dissonance in ableist individuals and the false dichotomy that you cannot advocate both for yourself and other people in your shoe. That's very insightful. Thank you. Okay. So what we're going to do now is shift to taking some questions from the audience. And you have a couple of options if you're an audience member. I would say at this point, you're welcome to like turn your camera back on. If you want to see each other and want people to see you. You can either jump in when we have a quiet moment and ask your question out loud, or you can put it in the chat. It can be sent to me privately if you want it to be anonymous, or you can just put it in the whole chat and I will read it out loud. So I did have some questions messaged to me privately, and we will start with those. So I have someone who would like to know, how has disclosing your diagnosis impacted your platonic or romantic relationships? Positive, negative. Has there been any significant impact to your like personal relationships? And I would say particularly any romantic relationships when you have disclosed that you are on the spectrum. And this is for anybody who wants to jump in.
I actually think that everyone should approach romance and dating as if they were an autistic person. Which is to say, without assuming that they understand what the other person is thinking and feeling. Because you might. Like, I've heard that neurotypical people have magic powers and they can do that a lot of the time. But it's not 100% for anyone. It isn't actually magic. They're like using information that they can perceive and I can't, which is fine and great. And like, that's a good skill to have. But I do think it might be better in some cases if they pretended they were autistic and they were like, how are you feeling about this? I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Is this going well for you? Yeah, that kind of thing. Like, so I think, yeah, like, not to get too much into my own experiences, but I think that there's a way that it's helpful to know going in that I can't read other people because I don't make mistakes that could hurt someone because I assume I know what they want. I just ask them.
Yeah, okay. That's an interesting, and I think it's certainly an accurate and relatable description of how that disclosure can have an impact. Would anyone else like to speak to the effect on their relationships? Is that a hand, Eric? Yeah, go ahead if it is.
I mean, I met one of my first really serious girlfriends after that piece came out. So, who's also autistic, but then like, on top of that, like as a result afterward, I think what it did is, if you're on Tinder or if you're on Bumble or things like that, which I think can sometimes be good, to Zoe's point, you should always kind of go into dating as if you're autistic, like assuming that you don't know what other people are thinking. You should always try and ask them what's going on. A lot of times sometimes I'm grateful that I don't have to, that like you don't see people's last names on dating apps. but like anybody with a kind of wherewithal who sees Eric, journalist, lives in Washington D.C., can probably like Google and find out what I'm find things out. But I think what it also does, in some ways, it might actually be good in that it weeds out the people who are already going to be. I'm trying not to cuss right now. Which is harder than I realize. It weeds out people who were going to be jerks about it, and who were not going to be tolerant and accepting of it. The interesting thing is that once I disclosed to my friends, they were often more than what, like my friends who I knew before, or like when they realized that this is just something that I was going to do. Most of my friends have been excellent, and they've been the ones who are like, oh, do you want to go to this place? It's not outdoors in the summer, so it'll be sensory friendly to you. Or let's go to this place because it doesn't have too much lighting, or because the lighting isn't too bad. It isn't overwhelming. Like most of the times, if your friends are your friends, they're going to be cool with you, regardless. And they're going to want, just like how I know not to say certain things around my female friends, or I learned, because I have a lot of LGBTQ friends, not to say homophobic things. In the same way, I've learned to, in the same way, I think that my friends reciprocate by not taking me to a place with fluorescent lights, so.
Yeah, I have also found that a good friend can be one of your best allies. A not so good friend may end up kind of ghosting you, and it really does weed out the people who you perhaps don't want to be with. While we're on this question, I'm going to answer it, and then we'll see if anyone else from the panel wants to, because it made me think of, a little over a year ago, I was dating someone pretty seriously, somewhere between dating and maybe engaged. It's a story for another time. Message me. Anyway, so it was serious, right? And one of the things that held him up is that his mother believed I had just pursued a diagnosis to get like extra time on tests and to get attention. And so he hated that she felt that way, and it was kind of a barrier because he needed her approval. And so sometimes even not a person you're in a relationship with, but someone they know can apply a judgment that impacts the whole relationship. So I hope that none of you have had that experience, but I will say that still happens. And let's see, Preston or Maya, if either of you want to talk about the impact on relationships, please jump in and answer.
I can. Something I noticed that a lot of my middle school age friendships played out as, or not middle school, early teens, when I was younger and I guess dumber, I would always tell my friends that I would kind of forewarn them at the beginning of the friendship that sometimes I would do really iffy things, and it was just because I was autistic, and I'd be like, I don't mean to, I can be rude sometimes, but I promise you I'm not doing it to hurt your feelings. And they'd be like, okay, yeah, that's reasonable. And then it would happen, and they would get mad at me, and I would be like, but I told you this would happen, and I told you why. And they would be like, no, you can't use your autism as an excuse in this. I know that you're a bad person now. And I've had a lot of friendships end over that, and it always just really perplexed me, because it was like, I told them this would happen, and they told me it was fine. What's going on? I've gotten a lot better at just not doing it to begin with. Instead of trusting that they'll be understanding, I've kind of had to modify a lot of my behaviors, but I dealt with that a lot in my early teen years with friends.
Yeah, I've also had those experiences. Like I said, it's really interesting to hear you guys talk about a lot of this that we have in common. Preston, do you want to talk about any experiences you've had telling friends or family relationships, just disclosing?
Yeah, not really. No, it makes me very uncomfortable. So
all right,
I'm not going to try into that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I muted myself. Yeah, Preston, you do not have to answer anything you do not want to answer. Okay, as far as questions, I'm not seeing any additional ones in the chat. Would anyone like to ask a question out loud or put one in the chat now? And it could be addressed to an individual or to the whole group.
Yeah, I'll ask a question to the panelist and the presenter. Any one of you guys would like to answer this. If you have someone coming to you and they're on the spectrum, and they're at that point in their life where they feel like they need to disclose, but they're super uncomfortable. They've never really disclosed before, and they're looking for advice. What's a piece of advice? Like, what do you think is the first or most important step for someone to think about when they're planning on disclosing?
It's an excellent question. If anyone wants to jump in, feel free to do so. I guess since no one else has spoken up, I'll give you my first thoughts on that, which are, I would advise someone that as much as I would like disclosing to everyone to be the answer, it's not. Like, as much as I want everyone to understand autism and to understand the spectrum and to be able to immediately get it, kind of like Amaya was saying, like, oh, I'm on the spectrum, and then you expect them to know what that means. For some people, the ingrained stereotypes and assumptions are so deep and kind of permanent that it may be wise in some situations not to disclose, even though you'd really like to, and you know that if they understood autism, that would help them understand you. So I would tell somebody, you know, kind of get a sense of what they know about disability and if they're willing to learn more before you do that. Anybody else have advice?
Yeah, I guess.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying, I'm kind of agreeing with what Claire's saying. You know, like, I guess it depends on the person, I guess. Like, you gotta get to know the person before you disclose the information, I guess. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Oh, it absolutely does. Anybody else on this particular question? If not, we have one from Samantha.
For this one, I would say script things. So practice what you're going to say and like think about some common questions you might get and how you would respond. Like if someone says, oh, you're not what I think of when I think of an autistic person. Or if they say, you might be autistic, but I still don't want you to do X, Y, and Z things that autistic people do. Or if they say, oh, autism, isn't that caused by vaccines? Or if they say, like, I don't really believe in disabilities or whatever, you know. Unfortunately, there's some nonsense you might get, and being prepared for it can sort of give you the opportunity to not in the moment be like, but why would you say that? It's not true, you know, because that can be really tempting. Also, I would just say, like, go in really, I don't want to sound too like woo here, but like centered, like go in calm, go in confident, believe in yourself. You're not doing anything wrong by having a disability. You're not asking for special stuff that other people don't get. You're not taking advantage of anyone. You're asking for your rights under the law. You're explaining how this person can include you, and they should want to work with you to build an inclusive environment that works for everyone. It's you saying, come and work with me and let's like make this a better place where I can join you and we can be in the community together. That's a good and important thing, and it's not something that anyone should have to feel like ashamed of or apologetic for.
Absolutely. And I love the idea that you're asking them to kind of partner with you when you disclose, and that you shouldn't demonstrate any shame. And I know one time I disclosed to a professor and his immediate response was, I'm so sorry. You know, and I told him I've recently been diagnosed with autism, and I was like, what are we sorry about? Like, I'm pretty glad I exist. I'm glad I exist in the form I do, like, you know. And so while you may sometimes encounter people like that, it's absolutely worth framing it as a partnership. Okay, let's do our question from Samantha. It's in the chat. She says, have you encountered that your face is sometimes read as an emotion or thought you're actually not having? So one example would be the resting bitch face, which is essentially, if you're not familiar with it, the idea that some people's expression conveys that they're pissed or frustrated even when they're not. And so in that way or in any other way, do you ever have difficulty with your facial expressions being understood? And if so, how does that affect maybe your decision to disclose or self-advocate?
I think I can kind of speak to this. One of the things that I've kind of done is it kind of at times, especially when as a journalist and I'm interviewing people, a lot of times what you do as a journalist is you're trying to get people, you're trying to relate to people and build a connection to people, because the more you build a connection with people, the more that they understand and they'll open up to you. But a lot of times when I'm doing that, I recognize that I have just like I have a face that just looks like this. So like what I'll say is like ahead of an interview is I'll say, or even before a job interview is I'll say, look, my nodding means I'm listening. Like, so a lot of times people just wonder why I'm just nodding along. And like, I look like a rooster sometimes where I'm just like, that's just me saying I'm listening and I'm paying attention. Or, also, that's just my way of saying, okay, I'm listening, I'm hearing you, I'm going, okay, that's just my way of saying I'm listening to you so that you don't think that I'm being a jerk or being something that I can't say on a recording.
Yes. And I don't know if anybody's been watching my little camera, but I have learned very intentionally by watching other people to kind of give big reactions and do lots of nodding, because I've realized what an impact that has in kind of keeping other people with you and helping them feel like you're mutually engaged. So even though that's not my instinct, I've learned like exactly when I can give a big smile or a nod, and I realize how big of an impact that has on the interaction. So yes, to your question, Samantha. Anybody else want to address Samantha's question? Amaya, go ahead.
So I notice a lot of times when I get really lost in thought, my expression reads, I'm bored, or I'm not interested, or I don't want to be here. And sometimes when I'm hanging out with friends, I'll happen to zone out and they'll be like, oh, are you good? Like you can go home if you want. And I'll be like, oh no, I was just thinking about like a million things. So I give that mini explanation all the time where like I'm actually thinking this and my face is reading this. But another thing, aside from expression, is voice tone. I notice when I get upset, my voice tone really reads like I hate you, I'm mad at you, grr. And I don't actually mean to communicate that a lot of the time. So like with my friends at college, anytime I'm having sensory issues or an unrelated problem, I only notice in hindsight, but I have a habit of treating them kind of poorly. And I always try, as soon as I notice, like, oh no, I was mean, I'll call them or I'll text them and I'll be like, I'm so sorry, that wasn't about you, that was about something else. And like, even just yesterday, one of them mentioned like, oh yeah, that one time you left and you were so mad at me. And I had to think really hard on what they were talking about. And I was like, no, I was mad at my roommate. I wasn't mad at you. And so we had to have like a big talk about that and how it was completely unrelated. And I just have a bad habit of taking a harsh tone anytime I'm upset about something, regardless of what it is about.
Yeah, and I think it's really funny that some people have the misconception that autistic folks don't have emotions or are unempathetic, because sometimes I think our emotions come through even more pervasively than they do for other people. So that is my own opinion. I would love to keep this going because I'm enjoying the conversation in the chat and in person, but it has actually been an hour. So what I'm going to do is give each of our panelists and our main speaker the opportunity to give us a closing thought. So if there's any last thing you want to share on this topic or something you would want everyone here to just kind of take away, this is your chance to share that. And then we'll wrap it up. And I will give you a few details about our next webinar that's coming up. So I don't know, Amaya, you are still on my screen. Would you like to begin with your closing thought?
I don't necessarily have a big conclusion because I feel like my story is really specific to myself, and I don't actually know very much about like other autistic people. I just know about my autism and like my dad's autism because I interact with him a lot. But I don't really know what would be like really helpful for other people because I'm not an expert on them.
Okay, well, that's a piece of advice in and of itself. Each person should be an expert in their own personal experience of autism. And that's helpful as a self-advocate. All right, what about, let's see, Eric, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
No, the main thing I would say is, as a journalist and as a storyteller and someone in media, Zoe made the excellent point that stories can be a means not to inspire, but as a means to actually show the gaps and the inequities and things like that. And I think the best thing that you can do is that I recognize that you have, that everybody, it's your right to share your story when you want to do it. And in the same respect, I would also add that you are the person who is in control of your story and of your narrative. And you are, therefore, you have the right, and I say this as someone in the press, to say that this is how you want your story told, and you don't want to be misrepresented, and you don't want people to, and you are the person who can control your narrative. And be very careful about how you share it. I don't want to like sound scoldy, but like recognize that your narrative is valuable, and don't let people take control of it. Always recognize that it's yours and it's your autonomy.
Wow, that's a powerful piece of advice. Let's see, who have we not heard from yet? Preston, is there anything you wanted to share with us? Did we lose Preston? Oh, I think we dropped Preston at the hour. Okay, so Zoe, that means it's your turn.
All right, as a final spot, everyone please remember to vote. We have voting resources at autisticadvocacy.org/vote. You can find out all kinds of things about voting. Voting is a really important way to make your voice heard. There's a lot of voter suppression going on right now. So you can fight that by voting anyway, and we will help you.
I love that. What an activist ending to it. Get out there and vote. All right. Well, again, a huge thank you to everybody on this webinar, and especially Zoe for presenting such great information. Thank you to our attendees for making the time to attend. We have got another webinar coming up, and what we're going to do, because we know the holidays get really chaotic, is kind of combine our late November webinar with one for early December and just do it the first week of December. So anyone here who wants to join again, you should receive the email advising about that webinar because you received information about this one. And we are going to focus on mental health and the way that that affects neurodivergent people, because the holidays can be really challenging for both neurotypicals and neurodivergent people alike. There's a lot of feelings, there's a lot of memories. So we're going to talk specifically about mental health and ways that autistic people can support their mental health and or seek support from other people. So we hope you will join us then. We do not have a specific date yet, but be looking out for a date in the first week of December, hopefully kind of between that Thanksgiving and Christmas/Hanukkah time. And that way everyone can participate. So yeah, I appreciate everyone being here, and we will see you in the beginning of December. Bye guys.